and in the.
All right, we are right at 5:30, so I'll call tonight's EDA meeting to order. Karen, can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Roberts,
Here.
Commissioner Huntash,
Here.
Commissioner Husnick,
Here.
Commissioner Finneman,
Here.
Commissioner Lorge,
Here.
Commissioner Erickson,
Here.
and President Bain.
Here. I'd like to invite everyone to rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Members of the EDA, you have an agenda before you this evening. I will entertain a motion to approve or any changes.
I move we approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose, and our agenda is approved. Our next item this evening is meeting minutes from November 8th, 2021, our regular EDA meeting. And happy to entertain a motion to approve or any changes.
I move that we approve.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
Oppose. 2 abstentions. Do you have that? Abstentions from Councilmember Erickson, or Member Erickson and Councilmember Husnick. All right, next up this evening, downtown watershed study results. Dan, do you want to start us and kick it over to Ryan, or are we going to have Ryan start?
Yeah, I can start it. President, members of the EDA, before you tonight is the downtown watershed study results. This is an informational only presentation from Ryan tonight, just to kind of go over the results of the downtown watershed study. This is on the council's agenda tonight for consideration and approval. But since it relates to the downtown and we're doing the downtown planning, I felt it needed to be at least the EDA aware of this study. So Ryan's here tonight to go over the details on what was found in the watershed study for downtown.
Are we going through the PowerPoints at all?
I can get it teed up here just 1 second.
Do you want me to go to the computer or just speak from here and we'll just bounce some slides?
Let me just get the packet pulled
It's
up
just
here.
a short group of slides, but I think it'll help you guys visualize and connect with the language when we walk through it. So basically the reason that we partnered with Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District to complete the downtown stormwater study is obviously the impacts we've had on permitting with today's current rules and requirements that are required of the watershed district, and just other environmental agencies too, and basically kind of handcuffs developers of what they can and can't do downtown. You know, the old City Hall redevelopment was fortunate, it had the parking lot area. So there is a bunch of stormwater features underneath that parking lot that people don't traditionally see, and that cost and impact of that was pretty substantial. But then if we were going to continue to follow rules as they are laid out and not look at alternative ways to fulfill those rules, you would have lost basically your character of your downtown, which includes a zero setback in the downtown area in the district in that zoning. Thus, that means they could have 100% impervious. So, but that was one thing that we've heard loud and clear over several years. You know, as redevelopment of downtown occurs, we want to continue that character that is, you know, like Stillwater or a traditional downtown that goes building to building, but still be able to meet the rules and requirements of the watershed district. So this is what really kind of focused everything and all the efforts towards this. This has been a bunch of stuff kind of going on in the background on several permit applications or potential projects that were getting to a point, then they would find out where we'd be and, well, how do I achieve that? Even to the who always still owned the old greenhouse? Yeah, tall guy with gray hair. You know what house I'm talking about? I think they painted it. It's not green anymore. Right by the chocolate place, right there behind it.
Oh, yeah.
Corbett?
So we want Corbett Johnson, right?
Yeah.
So we once almost had a redevelopment there,
He
but
did
then
one, yeah.
when they got into the weeds of the rules and requirements of the watershed district, it just killed the project because there was nowhere to treat that volume that would have been a required part of that permit. So that's just kind of an example of how something could have happened that never happened once we got in the rules and requirements. So let's just go to the next slide. You know, this kind of just gives a summary in time, you know, as development occurred to where we're at today, and basically preparing for redevelopments and those efforts moving forward. So Next slide really summarizes kind of what I just gave you the background and debrief on to get into the weeds of what we talked about. So the next slide is really the focus point of the study. There's basically 3 distinctive drainage areas in the downtown area that's been designated as the downtown. The red area directly drains into the lake, basically through Lakeside Memorial Park. The blue area drains to the north up through the Highway 8 drainage corridor, and then basically into the creek that flows out of Forest Lake, which develops the Sunrise River eventually. Yellow and area in yellow basically all drains over to Bixby Park and to that retention area that was built part of the Broadway reconstruction project. So you can see the blue that's already shown here that represents those ponds that are there. But we'll move forward out of there. And then part of the study, then we started, zeroing in this particular area, the watersheds that were identified, and start some priorities and redevelopment priorities based over short term and long term, and how we would be able to address some of that stuff moving forward. Next slide. So it's anticipated that the downtown area then would still be permitted with 100% impervious, or the 0 setback that we talked about. The other areas outside of that downtown zoning district, it's assumed that they would develop at 85% impervious, which matches city code. If they were to develop over that 85%, then they would be responsible to do something on site to make up that volume. Otherwise, everything else would be accounted for if they choose to use this study to suffice for their rules and requirements of the watershed permit. For example, where the old Asian China site used to be next to TCF Bank, and in between TCF Bank and, well, it's not TCF anymore, it's another name.
Changed again, yeah.
In between there and what used to be Super America, it's now Speedway. So that site right there, they could move forward on their own independent project, construct their own stormwater stuff to meet all the rules and requirements. Obviously, that takes away buildable land on that site that could be used for commercial business and operation, depending on what's going on there. So otherwise, they can choose to buy into what we'll talk about later, and then that would waive their rules as long as they kept their developments at 85% impervious or less. Okay. All the other stuff is just really breakdown of numbers and charts and how you get to some of the numbers we talk about in the end of the study. Not going to go into the weeds and all that stuff. It'd be hard to kind of dissect and understand some of that. But big picture is 3 distinctive drainage areas, 3 distinctive zoning requirements. So next slide. So the downtown area obviously had the biggest challenge. We looked and reviewed and tried to find alternatives that could be completed within this watershed drainage footprint itself. We could not find the volume to make up what we know would be redeveloped in that area. So we had to then start looking at other areas within the community, off-site, but draining basically towards the same points of discharge, which is all this area and then anything around the lake. We obviously drain to where the lake outlets and then starts forming the Sunrise River. So with that being said, we started looking at BMPs that could be, next slide. We started looking at BMPs, best management practices, could be rain gardens, infiltration basins throughout First Lake. And then these are some of the areas that were identified that could meet some of that volume and rate control that were basically accepted and supported by the watershed district. So, and in essence, we could go across from downtown on the east side of First Lake. In those areas, there's some pretty large improvements that we could make within existing city right away. That would take areas that aren't currently being treated, but here we're now treating them. So that would be the offset that would be used and supplemented towards the downtown. So for instance, let's just say we built some of these BMPs that are outlined on this page, and they're already built in practicing and in operation and use. So if a development then came along in downtown, they could buy into what was already completed, and we'll talk about those costs in the back here. And that would then waive their requirements on site. So they wouldn't have to give up buildable area, and this would fulfill those rules and requirements. So it's kind of a lot of conversations in partnership with the city and the watershed to develop and understand other ways to meet permit requirements other than by what's the book says right now, you know? So it's a different way to look at, ultimately, we're treating the same body of water, the same discharge points, and in theory, if you can do something over here versus here, it still would balance it out, right, of what would be required. The other area that we talked about, which is the north downtown and Highway 61 area, obviously has a large drainage complex area that can utilize a lot of MnDOT ditches. Watershed's been in conversations with MnDOTs that we could potentially do something overall in this area that would also account for any Highway 61 reconstruction and utilize that whole northern downtown area. So pretty clean cuts, like Lighthouse Lofts, all that drains to the area, but they're able to satisfy all the permit requirements on site. Now, if that would have been, you know, all completely underground with building all above it, they wouldn't have been able to achieve that stormwater on site, because all the blacktop pavement parking lot that you guys can drive through now and park and go to the restaurant or apartments, underneath that is all storm sewer structures that have rate and volume control built within it, and like big plastic pipe container have orifices in it that, you know, slow the water down, and it has to bleed out over time and stuff like that. So I believe overall, I think that total project cost for that, just the stormwater and their engineering they put into that, you're probably anywhere from 250,000 to 300,000 that was into that when it was all said and done. So very expensive on-site stormwater management to meet current rules and requirements of the watershed district. The other area that we talked about was Broadway Avenue, and we could do enhancements to the existing ponds and iron enhanced sand area inside that park that could expand those ponds to make up for that other area that's been identified for redevelopment, as long as they stay at that 85% impervious. If they bought into the stormwater here, this is how their site would be treated. So then they could develop at 85% impervious and not have to do anything more than that to fulfill the rules and requirements of the watershed district. This one's pretty easy, a lot easier, because this is all local property. This is owned by the city of Forest Lake. So, you know, obviously that's a easier avenue. So the first option I talked about with the downtown area is pretty easy, because we're proposing the BMPs to be constructed in city right away. Here again, it's being constructed on city property. Obviously the one in the middle, which is the most difficult, is where we're trying to do a joint venture with MnDOT's. Got a lot of green space, but you got to work through the red tape, you know, and achieve something collaboratively together at the end to suffice all the rules and requirements. But then MnDOT's going to be very cautious too about not giving up too much property or not being part of that pie to account for any Highway 61 reconstruction. So a lot of coordination with that. And then basically on the back is just a one-page summary of what the cost would be if adopted as is. The next step in the study, though, is to go through a process of working with the watershed district and finalizing the fee schedule that would be basically if formally adopted into the city's fee schedule and development code and the watershed permitting. So if you were in the downtown area, if you were redeveloping, the charge would be $67,000 per redeveloped acre to account for all your storm sewer. Therefore, you could just waive your, not do anything on site. So like for Lighthouse Lofts, how many acres that was redeveloped, they could have paid into this. Well, they're actually in the northern portion, but let's just say the Gone building, or that we've talked about, and know that there's some communication going on. And if that were to redevelop, whatever that acreage is, they could pay into that, and per acre redeveloped. This would then offset their rule or their permit requirements with the watershed district. But what this money goes towards is those improvements that have been identified. That's how you get to these dollar amounts, right? Obviously, the downtown area needs the most area improvements for volume and rate control, because we're 100% impervious, 0 setbacks, so we maximize the space. Otherwise, if they wanted to do something on site, then you just lose developable area, and then it might be instead of a row of buildings and face right up to the back of the sidewalk, you're gonna have, what, are you gonna have green roofs maybe, you know, I'm sarcastically saying, or a pond in between buildings? You know, that's not what we want, nor would a developer want, especially if we're talking about where Vanelli's was, you know, there's gonna be some sort of parking, restaurant, maybe retail, housing. So last thing they're gonna wanna do is have to account for a pond somewhere to treat water on site. This gives them an avenue, an alternative pathway to get around that permitting. I think in the study, and we actually have some comparisons of some other development fees. So ours are much lower than what you might see in some of these other communities that have done some of this stuff. But it's, you know, whatever you can maximize that site and not have to put stormwater on, that's what the developer's gonna be enticed. But if you already have this process approved and in place, that makes a pathway for a developer a known, a critical point of a project already known, and they like to know that stuff, and we've talked about that a lot. Dan's talked about it a lot too. You know, the biggest thing that a developer considers risks is the unknowns, and we're able to alleviate one of those things that has been an unknown here in this situation. The other one is the north downtown Highway 61, Broadway, and Broadway areas. Just different costs because of different area to work in. Expanding a pond is gonna, you know, be a little different type of construction than a brand new pond. So why the little different offset in the numbers, but basically less than $20,000 per acre redeveloped, you know, you can buy into the stormwater fee as is calculated now. There could be some trade-off. Maybe you guys think 67 should be a little lower, and some of these other guys brought up, so it's a little more level. But this is what the numbers tell you per the drainage areas, and why 3 different numbers. It's almost like 3 different projects. So next slide. And this just kind of recaps how you capture the money. You know, obviously our next portion of the study would be to finalize the fee schedule that would go along with this. And if implemented, it would have to be incorporated in the development code, the city's fee schedule, and the watershed permitting. This is a study that's been presented to the city council. It's also been presented a couple times to the watershed board. And tonight we just wanted to share it with you guys, as we hope to formally just to approve it and adopt it for the watershed, then to take next step. But then try to work with the watershed on constructing that first BMP that would serve that downtown area when something comes along. And then if you got something constructed, whether you bond for that, or if you were able to get some funding somehow, or if it's just stormwater fees that come out of our general stormwater fee that we have now, as the development occurs, they basically would pay that back to offset those costs. And that's how those costs were generated. Now, obviously, over time and inflation and construction costs, the city revisits their fee schedule annually. Tonight's one of those nights. Sometimes you can do a supplement review if you need to, if something drastically changed, such as some of the fees, you know, based on what's going on in the market. But so that's kind of the overall picture to help the stormwater permitting with the downtown or commercial redevelopments in the downtown area, or the Highway 61 in the Broadway area, and a plan to account that's been supported by the watershed district and city staff.
Thank you, Ryan. Dan, are you looking for a resolution or a vote of support from the EDA tonight as a message to council, or is information only?
If it's up to EDA's discretion if they want to pass one. I didn't have anything planned, but if you want to pass one, we can definitely relay that on to council tonight when they consider approving the plan.
Before we get to that point, let's maybe just open up if there's questions for Ryan on scope of the project, next steps. Member Finneman, it looks like you have a question.
Ryan, I was just curious, we have the stormwater systems in place, they have been in place downtown. I understand the offsite. Is there anything that might show up relative to changes in rules or requirements on the systems that are there, such that there might be an additional cost? Or let's call it maximum development. I mean, the full 99 point whatever.
Well, the watershed district has changed rules every so often, even, I mean, 5 years ago, our rules are different than 5 years ago, right? But we've taken the area per the 85% or the 100% impervious to calculate the volume that would be needed. Now, the piping network towards those BMPs is most likely undersized. Well, it is, because of how even stormwater calculations have occurred. So as the city does street reconstructs, we know that and need to account for upsizing those pipes, but that's the city's grid, the city's grid network. The stuff on Broadway is very well designed and sized just because it's newer construction. But as we get more impervious built in this area, we will have to do more upgrades of our storm sewer system. But then when we do come back to this area, it's gonna probably most likely deal with sewer and water too.
And that could impact the development, the developer, and
No,
their costs.
that'll be a city street project unless something's so big, we have to drive a new pipe to this pond immediately, right? In the Broadway area or the North 61. But where have you seen anything that big? I'm talking about like a Twin Stadium or something that size, that big of an impact. The downtown area, if we go blast out all 4 blocks, then you just gotta go build what's showing, right? And those other spots throughout to offset that offsite. So those areas are more than enough identified in case there are issues or hiccups on any of those, or say over time too. Let's say it's one of these areas, especially up by the lake off of South Shore Drive. Somebody wants to come and tear a bunch of houses down and build bunch of townhomes, more density, right? Obviously, we would probably gobble up those areas that have been identified, but the areas that are on the east side of the lake are more than enough. But then over time, let's say these are totally impacted, we can still work with the watershed district to identify new areas to account that same volume and rate that needs to be met in the downtown district. So all those numbers are there. It's just in time, where do you actually treat that stuff to allow for those alternative permitting? So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Ryan, so I guess a couple questions that you did. My understanding is that this watershed district is probably one of the more stringent in the metro area. And what kind of pushback is there to that? Is this like much more extreme than what downtown White Bear and the downtown Stillwater have to deal with? And are you, with this study, are you suggesting, is it staff's recommendation for the council to approve this? Or is there some more negotiating or?
It's our recommendation to fully support this as is, because we've had already identified these areas that could meet their rules as is. Comfort Lake, Forest Lake is shared with Rice Creek Watershed District in the city. So we have 2 watershed districts here. Comfort Lake's a little stricter on the rain events, 1.1 inch versus 1 inch. Amount of area disturbed is half of what triggers than what Rice Creek allows. So it's just a lot of those little things through a permit like that add up to some of these big impacts on these downtown projects. Rice Creek has some more exemptions in their permit requirements than Comfort Lake, Forest Lake does. But then as the numbers are calculated and everything's showed within that 85% impervious or 100%, this is what you can do to achieve those. If you, in those areas of the 85, if you want to go 86%, it might be a small rain garden then on your property that could be a tree trench in between parking spots. Something as simple as that, but you're gonna have to do something additional to account for that if you go over that percent that's been allowed. So every time that they go through a rule revision, we comment, and we get where we're at. We've gotten some things to adjust. At first we thought Rice Creek was very strict rules too, but they just have a lot more experience working with municipalities on road projects, and they see what works and what doesn't. I can fight this so hard, but in reality, what did I really gain? So if we can work on something bigger and better, like I think where things have evolved with, and we've done a lot of nice projects with Rice Creek to get more things implemented in the district instead of fighting about something and little on something. We continue to have those conversations. It's just education and working together. And, you know, this is one of those situations we're able to work together. Now, obviously, we'd love for them just to adopt the same rules. I mean, just for one, own city staff, so we're not having them learn two sets of rules. Developers, same thing. Developer might do a project in the south side of town, but then they go do something north side and have to abide a little different rules to follow by in their development. Same with Washington County. They got County Road 33s in both watershed districts. We got two things, we had separate things we're being permitted for. So it's just things we work through. You know, it's the goal of the watershed is to protect the environment, and you know that's they do, right? And our job is we're trying to promote business, and we want business now. We want storefronts. We want foot traffic. We want, you know, so we ultimately both want something, but we just gotta some give and take to get to there. So.
Large, go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. In your report, which I did read, in the downtown area, we are at 100% full capacity in the pipes. Is that correct? So the flow or the rate, the capacity, if we expand any town, will it all have to be redone?
No,
underground?
because we've already considered it 100% impervious. It can't get any more impervious.
Okay,
So anything we do, it's going to be the same as it is today, right? But over time, you know, you're probably going to do some BMPs here and there just with projects together with the watershed. Maybe it's something as little as a rain garden or a tree trench in the parking lot areas too, right?
okay, so if condos went in,
It's not going to change the volume of water generated
it's not?
because it's already considered 100% impervious in the numbers.
Okay. Then the other thing is you mentioned other types of funding. Is there any county or state funding help for any of these projects?
There's a lot of different ways to go about getting funding. Now, if you were specifically going after a water resource type of funding for an enhancement, then you couldn't use that to allow somebody to offset their permit requirements. You can't use clean water funding to offset permit requirements. So maybe it's an economic development downtown grant, revitalization project that has a grant, something kind of like what White Bear Lake did. Inside of that, then you can implement some of the requirements to meet that, but otherwise it's most likely going to come down to the county would only probably participate if it's affecting their project. So if the county was doing anything with Broadway, adding more impervious westbound, they would participate with that and they'd be required for those rules and requirements. But right now, everything is accounted for within that pond that was already constructed with the Broadway reconstruction project. The states, there's grants, but again, whatever grant you do find, it can't be used to offset permit requirements. So it's going to be more of a redevelopment grant, probably somebody that uses down there. City's mechanisms that are easy to use here is, you know, our stormwater funding. So every parcel in the city pays is it quarterly fee in the stormwater impact fee. It's calculated differently based on residential or commercial property, but that goes into the stormwater fee, and we could look at using a portion of that to start constructing some of this stuff, or the city's talked about bonding to go out and complete some of this stuff, and then the stormwater fee would pay that bond payment. And then when the redevelopment occurs, that money from the developers would go towards that bond payment too. That's a way to pre-construct it, or part of a development agreement, say, GON might be here first. Let's say the GON building shows up tomorrow. Maybe they pay in what their fee would have been, and then it's the city and the watershed's responsibility to go construct those BMPs that would have satisfied their permit requirements. So, you know, that you just gotta use some common sense with the first application that comes in. When has the city started any improvements yet? If not, how can they continue to move forward, and then we, make an obligation to construct that to offset their permit.
Okay, at what point does a business owner who wants to redevelop, this question came up, I hope this answers, when do they find out the cost of a certain project, what it would cost them for this?
So that's the next step in the study that has to be finalized, is the fee schedule costs. In the back of the PowerPoint, we shared with what those are calculated to date as. Right, there's a cost. So if they were in a downtown and redeveloped, and they were required to, say they redeveloped an acre, 67,000 is what we would tell them they need to pay.
Okay, so if somebody was under the impression it would cost them $1 million to redo a building downtown, that's totally fictitious.
Well, or they got, what would that be? How many acres?
Okay, that's great, yes, okay. I think we got that answered.
I would love to see $1 million fee, because that means we got one heck of a development coming in.
Yeah, I'm just wondering where that misconception came from and how we can stop that. So,
How we can stop that is, we're very flexible in having pre-application meetings with any potential developments. We often, if it's on 61, we'll include MnDOT, the watershed district, city staff, and me and my staff, just so we can answer all those questions right up front, and give the pathway for the developer. So if you're hearing stuff like that, I would suggest that we have a pre-application meeting. That way everyone can get on the same page. We know what the developer's thinking, or things that they should be thinking about, and then we can talk about these avenues that the developer could have if this is in place. This is obviously something they would want to know about.
thank you.
Ryan, the folks that are doing the downtown study for us, are they kind of in the loop here, what the possibilities are here and the plans are?
They got all this, and then some more, and then I've also tracked down some stuff from MnDOT for them too, and shared with them. So
Good.
they understand that, really the downtown stuff, all it's gonna impact is the area that they're developing. So if you're developing an acre, then here's your stormwater. All the stormwater stuff is gonna be constructed off-site, so it's not gonna actually affect the downtown footprint and the zoning of the downtown area. So it really shouldn't change too much of their plan, if any, other than some costs that are estimated.
But it does help them with their suggestions for us.
It certainly helps them know that I don't have to reserve all this area to construct BMPs to meet rules and requirements of the watershed, yes.
Member Huntosh, did you have a question?
Well, so if this passes, then if you know the square footage of your lot or your property downtown, you can do the math and figure out approximately how much. So if you own half an acre, it's half of this fee, correct?
Nope. Whatever is considered and agreed upon is the redevelopment area.
Maybe point of clarification on where we are in the process. So on the agenda for tonight's council meeting is simply to approve the study. The next steps related to the cost summary and the specific projects would come forward at a later time. Is that right, Ryan?
And I know
Just to make
Tim
sure.
Olson, some of you guys have met, he's already got some meetings lined up with Public Works, Dave Adams, and the Watershed District to start finalizing some of those. What are we going to stay with what's calculated? Well, there was some talk about leveling that playing field, but I don't support that. I would support as presented, because you're allowed to develop 100% in the downtown area, where the other areas you're being held to 85%, so. But if somebody in any of these areas wants to do all their treatment on site, they're perfectly allowed to do that too, and not have to participate in this other alternative permitting opportunity.
That was going to be my question, and maybe worth kind of refocusing on. So it's an option, but if somebody wanted to,
Give up buildable area.
right, and wanted to meet the requirements in another way, however they might choose to meet the requirements, that's certainly an option.
No.
So it's not forced participation, but it is an option that we don't have today. There is no kind of common management or any sort of common plan or an option to buy into a city plan.
And if a developer came in and had a very strong, passionate opinion about the environment and had a lot of money, you might see a green roof someday. I mean, Target Center's got green roof on it, so a lot of extra cost in a building to do so, but it's done.
Currently, what we're collecting for those stormwater management fees and all the different properties, is that fund balance typically, is there a fund balance typically at the end of the year, or what are we using that? Is there a way to use some of that? I think you mentioned it, to keep these development costs lower for developers to entice
We
them.
wouldn't lower the costs that are identified here. It still would have to account and pay for the improvements that are planned for those areas. The stormwater fee is, we compare it to several cities, and typically we're in the lower end of what's collected. In my opinion, that we should be collecting a lot more than we are, and still won't even be at the top of a lot of other communities in the metro where they're collecting. But that stormwater fee goes for several things within the community. Goes for fulfilling our MS4 permit requirements. We call these often unfunded government mandates. And then storm culvert replacements, storm sewer cleaning, ditching,
On maintenance.
pond maintenance, pond cleaning, and
Lake.
studies, when we do some studies that we've have, or it could be as a funding mechanism for what we've talked about here, with knowing that somebody's coming behind you to pay you back. But then it's also, my understanding is that's been shifted into the lake budgets now. So that's where that money comes from too. So that stuff.
There's a lot on that fund, and I think, and a lot of that has shifted right over the last year and a half. And so I think part of what we always need to keep an eye on is whether, what are the demands of the fund? Thank you for pulling this up. And then how do we fund those projects? How much of those are resident supported, business supported, and how much of them are individual and project
Sometimes we've
investor
just
supported?
participated with cash to the watershed district on a major BMP enhancement up at Hayward and North Shore Drive. We just gave cash for that. And then Hilo on the south end of the lake, they did a large project. We participated with some cash there, and areas like that where the watershed will do 99% of the work, and we gave some money to participate. Maybe it was a grant they applied for. Lots of times the grants that they go after are 75% grants and 25% is local match. They'll do half of that, and we would do the other half sometimes. That big pond out on Third Lake, I think what road that's off of.
Log Lane.
Yeah, but it's a different name. But a local term, Log Lane.
I'm going to do a little bit of clock management here, because we do have a hard stop at 6:30 for our Truth and Taxation meeting. This is a great discussion, so I don't mean to cut it short, but I do want to make sure we have enough time for the rest of our agenda items. Other questions? And I guess council always values EDA's, opinion. If you were in a position and wanted to make a motion to recommend approval of the study, happy to entertain that if the EDA was so inclined, but that's your option.
In my opinion, I think it's fortunate that we got the almost 100% impervious and we got an off-site solution that opens up the store to at least development downtown. So I think that's a fortunate outcome for whatever negotiations happened.
Yeah, Ryan, do you think that the watershed district is, with any conversation, do you think that they're going to sign off on this, or do you think there'll be still some pushback and some?
If they don't sign off on this, I will be the most disappointed person in this room for the amount of time and energy and meetings that we've had to get to this point.
And their co-sponsorship
And we've already
of the
been to their
study.
board.
Right.
So if anything was not supported, it should have already came out by now. There's nothing we have not vented more in the last 2 years than this study. Not even close.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a good outcome.
Nice work, Ryan.
So I would
Go ahead.
suggest that we make a recommendation to the council.
Council to approve?
I'll second it.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Not hearing any. All those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Oppose? And motion carries.
Brian.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ryan. It's a nice project or nice study to have completed. Next agenda this evening, BR&E agreement. Dan, do you want to walk us through this?
President, members of the EDA, in your packet tonight is the updated 2022 BR&E agreement between the EDA and the Chamber of Commerce. This agreement that's enclosed in your packet does incorporate the feedback that we received during the November meeting. The Chamber of Commerce has also reviewed this agreement and is okay with it as presented. The enclosed memo, I won't go through it line by line, but it does highlight the terms or goes through the activities that the chamber will engage in as a part of the BR&E agreement. There really weren't any substantial changes to that list from our current agreement to 2022. One change that we did make in this one based on the feedback was that language was added to allow the EDA to reimburse the chamber for expenses that are specifically related to the BR&E activities. During the feedback session, there was some conversation about if the chamber is doing a mailing that's specific to BR&E, how do we reimburse them for that activity? Add language in there that does allow the EDA to reimburse the chamber. The chamber does need to come in and get those expenses pre-approved before authorizing those expenses. And we also capped them at $1,500 for the first year. So it's not a guarantee that that'll be expended, but if we come up with an agreeable project that we want to do for BR&E activities, there is some additional budget there as well. The total cost for services remains unchanged. It's $5,000 for the year, just like it was in 21. It is a one-year agreement, so we will revisit this again next year in the fourth quarter to make any adjustments to the subsequent year's agreement. Staff is recommending approval of the 2022 BR&E agreement, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the changes or the agreement itself.
Thank you, Dan. Members of EDA, I know we had a big discussion on this when we workshopped the topic at a last meeting. Other questions you might have this evening as we consider final format? Nan, anything you'd like to add? Okay. Not hearing any questions, I'll entertain a motion to approve if anyone's ready.
I move we approve the agreement.
I'll take a motion from Member Lorge and a second from Member Finneman. Any further comment on this? Thank you, Dan and Nanette, for working through this final agreement. I appreciate also that we have the additional allowance for expense coverage. I think that's certainly appropriate. One-year term, and certainly I remain open to if there's identified areas for expanded scope and expanded fees, let's have that conversation as we proceed through here in 2022, but happy to support this tonight. Any other comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? And motion carries. Next item this evening is the 2021 EDA year-end review and work plan update. Dan?
Yeah, President, members of the EDA, this is something that we do every year. At the last scheduled meeting of the year, I tend to like to bring up the year in review just to kind of take a look back as to all the work that we've accomplished over the past 12 months. Enclosed in your packet, there's two lists. One, I did the update to the 2021 work plan and went through all of the deliverables in there and provided updates as to where we are on all of those various items. And then I also enclosed a list of the various projects sort of that kind of sits outside of that scope. You know, maybe we're a little bit more specific than what's enclosed in the work plan. And I'll go through those in a little bit more detail right now. One thing, as I was working on this list, I had to recall that we spent the first 6 months of the year in remote. So I had to go back and kind of remember, because in 2020 it was easy, you know, it was all full year remote. This year we spent the first 6 months in remote and have only been in person since July. So that bears a little bit on some of the work that we were able to accomplish, but I think given that split, we still were able to get quite a bit of work done in 21. A couple of the major accomplishments that the EDA did complete in 21 was some projects specifically related to direct business support. The EDA did a fund balance transfer to cover the license fees that were not charged to the massage therapists, massage license holders, and liquor license holders. Those fee waivers were only possible because of the EDA's agreements to do a fund balance transfer. So those funds directly supported those local businesses, so they did not have to pay for their license renewals in 21. So the EDA was able to provide some direct business support using fund balance. On the downtown side, a lot of the EDA's work was really focused on our downtown. For downtown planning, we did hire HKGI as the city's downtown planning firm, and spent a lot of time working on developing that plan here in 21. We also reviewed and update the downtown business incentive program. That will come back in 22 with as part of the overall incentive package for the city. I'm looking at bringing back a larger incentive package that sort of encompasses all the different options that are available to developers, and we'll get the downtown plan, the updated terms for that plan approved with the larger incentive package. So it's all done in one shot. So it's not just sort of this sort of onesie twosie. We'll get a full incentive package approved in 22. We also approved 2 downtown incentive applications. One was paid out, and one we're still waiting for the project to be completed, but it has been greenlit for payout once that is complete. Both the downtown sewer shed and watershed studies were completed in 21. We also purchased and installed the kinetic fish sculpture in the roundabout in downtown Forest Lake, and continued support of the downtown beautification efforts. So we did quite a bit of work in our downtown area here in 21. Also of note, New Track Senior Bus Service returned to Forest Lake in July of this year, so that service is back up and running. For next year, that will be moved out of the EDA's budget, and we put into the general fund budget as part of the senior center's budget. But since that was in the EDA's original budget, that was restarted here in July. I participated in promotion of development opportunities within the city at the MNCAR Expo Technology Summit and the Industrial Development Summit. Had a lot of great conversations with developers at those summits. And I will say at the MNCAR Expo especially, the mood for developers for when they heard that I was from the city of Forest Lake was extremely positive. A number of them said that we were becoming a hot market. So it went from when I first went there a couple of years ago, it was a little bit, they didn't quite know where we were, had a little bit of that, trying to cut through that fog, to now people were like, they knew exactly where we were, what we were doing. So that groundwork that we're having is definitely paying dividends. We also had a successful partnership with the Chamber of Commerce for BR&E services, which will continue in 22, and then continued support of the Forest Lake Public Schools Career Launch Program. So that I continue to attend those meetings as well. So I think when you look back at 21, there was a lot of great work that was accomplished by this board in 21. 22 is definitely shaping up to be a busy year as well for the ADA, so lots of great work on the work plan for 22. No actions requested on this item. It's here just for EDA's awareness, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the EDA may have regarding the update or the work plan.
Any questions for Dan? Comments? Thank you, Dan. We don't have anybody from Washington County here for a Washington County update. Dan, anything that was reported that you?
He did not. I did speak with Chris. He had no formal updates for tonight.
Excellent. And then Nan, anything from the chamber?
Good evening. Just a couple of things I'll make mention of. Just last week, 2 weekends ago, we had the pleasure of working with the City of Forest Lake on the hometown holiday. We presented or prepared goodie bags for 250 participants between what happened here in the City Hall as well as down at the lake. And so that was well received by our chamber members, and it was great to see the kids running around with all the trinkets and things down at the lake. Second, we are literally right now in the process. I packed office all day today. Tomorrow we move to our new location, so the chamber will have a better location to better serve our community. So I'm excited about that. We'll be street level and have various conference room and things like that to be able to better serve our community. And you can look for an open house invitation sometime February, Marchish. And we're also in the process of hiring. That's great. Had some interest, so very excited about that. At least a part-time person. Yay. And then the last piece is in conjunction, I will make mention with Washington County. I think I mentioned to you that we were in the middle of doing a future needs assessment with business all across Washington County. And so all of that information has been gathered and shared with Washington County, Chris Eng, as well as the other chambers within Washington County. And so we'll be going through and assessing those needs and creating some future, we're actually hoping to have some things that will be implemented in 2022, but then some future things a little bit further out. And so that's all in progress in combination with the work of the Washington County CDA. So those are the main things happening at the chamber. Any questions? All right, thank you.
Questions? Thank you, Nanette. And anything further, any further city updates or anything further to come before us? Jenny, go
Just a
ahead.
comment, Forest Lake Lions, we had a great turnout partnering with the city for the Christmas tree lighting in the hometown. It was fabulous. It's the first time I went, and it was kind of a hallmark moment. I encourage everybody to go to the tree lighting and the kids dancing and freezing themselves, you know, dancers on the street and on the asphalt and the fire department blocking it off. It just felt like, what a community, what a great town we are. And it was fabulous. Anyhow, encourage everybody to show up next year.
Okay. Anything else?
Just wondering where we are at as far as our new EDA hire, the community.
Patrick?
Well, as most of you hear on the news and on radio about how hard it is to hire people, our first attempt wasn't very good. We didn't have a great response. The applicants weren't that good, so we will have to try again. It's going to be tough, tougher than I've ever seen the market try to get anybody, whether it's this position or most others.
Thank you.
All right, and just quick reminder from logistics, this is our traditionally the last meeting of the year. So unless anything of urgency comes before us, this will be our last meeting, and we will see you all again the second Monday in January. And so my opportunity to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays and a great New Year. And thank you for all the great work this past year. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? And we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Yes.